Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chatham House. And I know that it's nice and sunny outside, which is one of the reasons we have such a good turnout here at 8 o'clock in the morning for a members' meeting, which is not what we normally do to our members. On the other hand, we don't often have the opportunity to have such a distinguished speaker come by Chatham House, although we were discussing, we had Julie Bishop with us yesterday, but I think, of the most to have two of the most dynamic foreign ministers operating on truly critical issues in complicated parts of the world in 2 days running is a huge privilege for us. And Minister Kang, thank you very much indeed for coming to Chatham House to share your thoughts with us today. So I'm delighted to welcome the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Korea, Kang Kyung-hwa, here to Chatham House and to come and talk to us, as she will today, about the future of the Korean Peninsula. We were discussing a few minutes ago, I was saying that one of the contrasts between think tanks in Washington and in London is the extent of focus on the Korean Peninsula, the challenges that it faces, which is that bit more distant even for a global Britain that keeps a wide eye. And although the economic relationship with South Korea is particularly deep and strong, and many British diplomats have worked actively on this topic, at least in terms of capturing the popular and even the press attention, this has been less of a topic. But obviously the last year has really been a truly dramatic one with the Singapore summit between the US President and the President of DPRK, obviously the preceding summit between President, and having President Moon and Kim Jong-un has been quite a moment of drama. And so what we're truly looking forward to at the moment is to hear from Foreign Minister Kang and her remarks about where the negotiations are, where they're going, and what the prospects are for the coming months and years. Foreign Minister Kang was the first the first woman to take the position of Foreign Minister, but she's somebody who has mixed her career between one in the Foreign Ministry and one in the United Nations. And she's held a number of important positions there in the UN, in fact, appointed to positions by 3 successive UN Secretary Generals, if I've got it right, Foreign Minister Kang, but having served as Deputy Relief Coordinator, Assistant Secretary General position there, as a Senior Advisor to Secretary Guterres as well, and also within the Foreign Ministry of Korea in a number of senior positions, including as Director General for International Organizations. And she really is somebody who, therefore, is extremely well placed to be able to address this topic. We look forward to your remarks, we look forward to a bit of conversation, and we look forward to some questions here with our members. But this could not be a more interesting time with us all enthralled to see what the denuclearization program is likely to look like, how it'll change the region. We really are at the moment of test, and we look forward to your remarks and your thoughts of this very delicate stage in probably one of the most important international negotiations taking place internationally right now. So Foreign Minister Kang, over to you, and welcome to Chatham House.
Well, thank you very much, Director Niblett, for that very generous introduction. I'm here for the first time, but it is truly an honor to be here in this august space of great tradition, a place where great minds have gathered on behalf of peace and prosperity around the world. So it's truly an honor to be here. I'm a little bit under the weather. I think the job of Foreign Minister requires you to travel to various places regardless of your preference for weather or climate. And I was in India and Singapore with my president last week. And that meant hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold for a couple of days. And as a result, I have this cold, which is a bit disruptive of my voice with a runny nose. So I will speak a bit lower than my usual tone, but I'm hoping that it still gets through to you. So, Director Niblett, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by thanking Director Niblett and Chatham House for giving me this opportunity to discuss the current state of affairs on the Korean Peninsula with a distinguished audience this morning. I am indeed delighted to have this exchange of views with you on the diplomatic efforts of my government to bring about complete denuclearization and lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. Admittedly, a very tall order, given the difficult history of the North Korean nuclear issue and decades of military tension that have defined relations on the Korean Peninsula. But we have a historic opportunity to achieve this, and we are endeavoring to strengthen the momentum for dialogue toward our goal, based on airtight coordination with our ally, the United States, and close consultations with Japan, as well as China and Russia. And we have enjoyed the fullest support of the United Kingdom and other key players in the international community in this endeavor, as reaffirmed in my meeting with the new Foreign Secretary, Mr. Jeremy Hunt, yesterday. Let me give you a brief background and update on the developments on the peninsula during the past year, and then I'll be very happy to take your questions and comments. I think we can say that the Korean Peninsula has been at the center of global attention, but never so intensely as in the recent months. In the past, the news was usually about North Korea's nuclear or missiles provocations, in defiance of the will of the international community. But this year, the news has been about the start of dialogue to resolve the issue and about inter-Korean reconciliation. The year began with North Korea responding to our repeated call to revive dialogue and to come to the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics and Paralympics. Its participation in these games in February and March was turned into an opportunity for high-level strategic dialogue between South and North Korea. And this then led to the first Inter-Korean Summit in 11 years on April 27th at the Peace House of Panmunjom. Another summit followed barely a month later, easing the way towards the first ever US-North Korea summit, which took place on June 12th in Singapore. Since then, there have been a series of inter-Korean talks to follow up on the Panmunjom Declaration, as well as the start of negotiations between the United States and North Korea to implement the broad agreement reached in Singapore. These developments would have been unimaginable as late as November last year, as the world watched with growing alarm over North Korea's repeated nuclear and missiles provocations. The change in less than 10 months seems dramatic, but it is in fact the fruits of strategic thinking and much hard work that has characterized the government of President Moon Jae-in since day one in office. Upon assuming office in May last year, President Moon Jae-in has put achieving lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula at the top of his foreign policy agenda. He made it clear that we seek peace with the North and not its collapse or sudden unification. And shortly thereafter, in July, while in Berlin for the G20 summit, he elaborated this vision in his Berlin Initiative, whereby South and North Korea would live together in peace and co-prosperity, free from the threat of nuclear weapons and war. And since then, we have been steady and unwavering in our endeavors to realize this vision, with the support of the neighboring countries and the international community. The three parts to this vision are as follows. First, the Korean Peninsula must be freed from the threat of nuclear weapons. The threat posed by North Korea's nuclear and missile development must be eliminated once and for all, and this must be achieved through peaceful diplomatic means, backed up by the solid combined defense posture of the ROK-US alliance. Our goal, and indeed that of the entire international community, is the complete denuclearization of North Korea. And on this point, our message to the North, in close coordination with the United States, has been a combination of pressure on the one hand with the offer of talks on the other. Its repeated provocations as it sought to advance its nuclear and missiles programs last year were met with further pressure and sanctions as embodied in the series of UN Security Council sanctions resolutions. The international community has acted in unity in implementing these sanctions and making clear to North Korea that its nuclear ambition is just not acceptable. But we have also offered dialogue to resolve the situation and to start charting a course towards a better, more prosperous future for North Korea. Second, we must establish lasting peace. Permanent peace has yet to be established on the Korean Peninsula. The armistice signed in July 1953, after 3 years of devastation, has left the two Koreas technically still at war. The 65 years since then have seen a few periods of dialogue and reconciliation between the two sides, but have mostly been characterized by military tension and mutual hostility. North Korea's nuclear and missiles development, the pace of which have quickened in recent years, greatly added to the tension and posed a grave security challenge for the whole world. Thus, for lasting peace, we must work not only to denuclearize North Korea, but also to replace the armistice with a peace treaty that will define the legal parameters of peaceful coexistence between South and North Korea. Third, with complete denuclearization and South-North peaceful coexistence, the doors will open to development and economic cooperation with North Korea. North Korea would be brought into the fold of co-prospering countries in East Asia, and the Korean Peninsula would become the bridge that links the Eurasian continent to the north and Southeast Asia to the south. The positive dynamics this would create for peace and prosperity in the region and the world would be enormous. In pursuit of this vision, we have engaged in proactive diplomatic endeavors led by President Moon himself to secure the political will and agreement of the top leaders of the key countries, most notably the United States and North Korea, but also of Japan, China, and Russia, and to win the support of key players in the international community. The two inter-Korean summits in April and May, and the first ever US-North Korea summit in June were the culmination of these efforts. In the outcome of these summits, the Panmunjom Declaration and the Sentosa Statement, President Moon and Chairman Kim Jong-un, and President Trump and the Chairman Kim, respectively, committed to work for the establishment of lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula and to achieve complete denuclearization. Furthermore, in the Panmunjom Declaration, South and North Korea agreed to sustain dialogue and promote inter-Korean cooperation in various fields, including military tension reduction, rail and road connections, forestry, sports, and family reunions. The two sides also agreed to declare the end of the Korean War and to seek three-way or four-way talks for the start of negotiations toward a permanent peace regime. In the Sentosa Statement, the United States and North Korea reaffirmed the Panmunjom Declaration, committed to overcome the decades of hostilities between the two sides and to work towards a new relationship, and to start the recovery and return of American POW MIA remains from North Korea. And most importantly, North Korea reiterated its commitment to complete denuclearization and the US pledge to provide North Korea with security guarantees. The US-North Korea track to implement the Sentosa Statement began with Secretary Pompeo's third visit to Pyongyang earlier this month. And this has been followed with further talks for the WMIA remains, and working level negotiations on denuclearization and security guarantees are expected to take place soon. The South-North Korea dialogue to implement the Panmunjom Declaration has been active on several fronts, with some concrete results already. The military communication line along the Western Sea coast has been reconnected, and further talks are expected on steps to reduce military tension. Red Cross talks have led to preparations for a family reunion event in late August, and work is underway to open a South-North Joint Liaison Office. Sports talks and exchanges are also taking place. In these processes, the ROK-US coordination remains vital to ensure that the two tracks move in complementarity. We are well aware that the pace of improvements in inter-Korean relations is contingent upon progress on the denuclearization track. And we remain firm that the Security Council sanctions placed upon North Korea for its nuclear and missiles provocations will remain in place and be faithfully implemented until we are assured of its complete denuclearization. This will take time, focus, and unity of purpose among all who share the goal of North Korea's complete denuclearization. In the meanwhile, my government is fully abiding by the sanctions regime in engaging with the North, seeking waivers where necessary, and ensuring that the cooperation projects do not translate into economic benefits for the North. And as we move forward, we count on the abiding support of our close friends. The United Kingdom, in particular, as a permanent member of the Security Council, share a special responsibility in ensuring the effectiveness of the sanctions and promoting dialogue to achieve complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, as confirmed in the Panmunjom Declaration and the Sentosa Statement. As a special friend of South Korea, who had sent its troops to fight with us during the Korean War nearly 7 decades ago, the United Kingdom shares our aspiration to achieve lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula, which must surely be the best reward for the sacrifice in so many lives it paid then. The Korea-UK ties have grown deeper and wider since then. With the support and encouragement of the United Kingdom and other like-minded countries, Korea has become a vibrant democracy and a thriving market economy that shares the same values with the United Kingdom. Our two countries have become vital trading partners and like-minded voices in global fora. The United Kingdom is our second largest trading partner in the European Union. So, we are obviously closely following the Brexit developments and working together with our UK counterparts to ensure that the bilateral trade and investment ties will continue to thrive in the post-Brexit era. My meeting with Secretary Hunt yesterday was very timely and useful in this regard, and I very much look forward to forging a very good working relationship with him. So let me end there. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Foreign Minister, for laying out, as you said, what has been just a remarkable last 7 months. In fact, we were talking just a few minutes ago before you started your conversation that we both had the opportunity to participate in a private meeting in Davos there on Korea. And suffice it to say that it was a pretty gridlocked discussion amongst those Western allies, to be frank, of the Republic of Korea, of South Korea, who really were trying to think of a way forward. But at that point, as you said, you really could not have foreseen what has happened since then. And you've gone through the series of steps that have taken place. And I also, just one other image, which has stayed in my mind very firmly since late last year, where I participated in a conference in Beijing where it was all about infrastructure connectivity. And there were people from South Korea, from Japan, from China, from the United States, a few from Europe. And they had this wonderful map up on the wall where they showed all of the connections that would happen. And I looked at maps, so this strange island south of China, and I couldn't work out what it was. And the map had South Korea and then a blank, and then the rest of the Eurasian continent. It was like it was cut off. And your remarks just then about the reconnecting of the Eurasian continent, this idea that there could be a north-south connection, of the Korean Peninsula could play this role. That image you evoked there in your speech was quite powerful because it's the complete antidote to what I saw last year. So I think the stakes at so many levels couldn't be higher. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions to get going, then I do want people hopefully here to think through what questions and issues they'd like to raise. But just contextually, if I can, I want to ask just about your thinking on China. Because obviously this is a negotiation in which each of the players, but especially the United States and China, are just extremely important and defining in the way this will move forward. And I just wonder if you could just help us think through what you think Chinese thinking is. There's been a lot of overestimation of China's power over North Korea in general, whichever leader, even Kim Jong-un, who I think has been blatant and blunt in his keeping China to one side until his last phase here. And it did seem that China's move not only towards the UN sanctions, but to step up what appeared to be unilateral sanctions on the transfer of oil early this year, around January, may have really been a moment that tightened the screw on the North Korean government and its thinking. How do you think China sees the progress here? What concerns does it have? How does South Korea play the relationship with China? Just anything you could share on their role in this negotiation. Such an important relationship bilaterally for you as well.
Of course. China is our largest trading partner. We have various conversations at official levels. And obviously, on the issue of peace and security on the Korean Peninsula, it's a player with a big interest. It is also the largest economic partner with North Korea, and given that the sanctions are about cutting off economic ties, obviously China has had a major role to play in terms of the effectiveness of these sanctions, and it has. It's a repeated statement, commits it to faithfully implementing the Security Council sanctions, and it remains committed to the shared goal of complete denuclearization. It's North Korea's key economic partner, but it is also a member of the United Nations Security Council, a permanent member, who writes these Security Council resolutions together with other members, and therefore it has a particular responsibility and ownership in ensuring that the global pressure regime to get North Korea, now that it's committed to the track, that it goes along that track with some concrete action.
But do you think that China's pressure to be meaningful and for North Korea to really feel the Economic Pressure Act requires more than China's observation of just the UN Security Council sanctions? Does it require China to go above and beyond at a bilateral level? Do you think that was and is instrumental in the pressure?
Well, I think we already saw clear indication of North Korea changing course with the chairman's New Year statement, right? So this is before what you mentioned about China's steps. When he said, responding basically to our call for revived dialogue and responding our invitation to come to the Pyeongchang Olympics. So you can analyze what led to that discussion and how the developments of last year fed into that. But I think already there was a swift change in the calculations of the North Korean leadership at the very highest levels. I think there is dialogue going at the various ways, two ways, four ways among the three ways among the four countries surrounding the region, and we think it's useful. Obviously, the diplomatic discussions made in private is the official versions of that is what we see, and that's just the nature of diplomacy. And we go by what we hear and what we are told. But we are confident that the Chinese continue to be serious about getting North Korea on the road to denuclearization and faithfully implementing the sanctions. They were very welcoming of both the Inter-Korean Summit and the U.S.-North Korea Summit as well.
And I raise it, as you'll appreciate, slightly because the worsening of US-China economic relations, which is now a feature of the period after the Singapore summit, and the considerable scaling up, at least rhetorically, on the next 200 billion, if the US does follow through on this, will change somewhat the diplomatic environment in which the US and China operates, and one wouldn't put it past the Chinese government to want to sort of potentially play on two sides of this. I mean, are you worried about the flow of the economic relationship bilaterally between the US and China potentially getting in the way of the incredible progress that's taking place on the Korean Peninsula, or nothing we can do about it? We just have to focus on the game.
Well, as I said, China is our largest trading partner. The US is our second largest trading partner. So if there's tension between the two sides, obviously we're deeply concerned at many levels. Yeah. First of all, at the trade and economic level, but also what it might mean for the very keen security issue. But I think the gravity of this and the implications of failure is there for all to see, and I think that is a shared analysis of the situation.
I think the President Trump has invested a lot of his own personal capital, obviously, in this working. So at some point, you'll have to balance those two dynamics out, his trade agenda and his diplomatic agenda. One more question from me, and then let me hand it over to our members and guests here. One of the views of those observing the remarkable progress that's taken place this year is to be a little cynical and say, well, actually, Kim Jong-un has achieved what his father and grandfather had not been able to achieve. He's, in essence, got North Korea to the stage of being nuclear, almost a de facto nuclear power, with an implicit ICBM capacity to be able to take some type of crude nuclear device potentially to the United States. He's clever enough to have just held off doing a missile test that would, it's a little bit in the gray zone, as people would describe it. You could say that he hasn't, completely revealed that capacity. But this is a moment for him to sort of declare victory and try to then sort of negotiate back to something that still leaves that level of ambiguity, but him with the security that his dynasty, his family, seem to have wanted, of following the China model. Get safe first with nuclear capacity, then focus on economic development. Now, that cynical view would say, therefore, he's not going to give it up that much. What's your reading? How would you sort of counter that viewpoint? Would you have some sympathy with it? What do you think?
Well, I think, yes, cynical, skeptical. I think a healthy amount of skepticism is always good, especially given the history of negotiations on this issue with North Korea. But I think when the leader himself has come out and committed before the international community complete denuclearization repeatedly, and he clearly understands what we mean and what we want when we seek complete denuclearization, it means the whole bit. It means the weapons that they already have, the materials, the programs, the plans, and the expertise involved, that this all has to somehow be eliminated. How to get there is the challenge, and it's going to be a tough challenge because they are very tough, smart negotiators. But I think having come out this far, for him to go back, I think will be hugely risky. Furthermore, he has not only come out to discuss denuclearization, he has committed vis-a-vis his domestic public a different path to the future in terms of economic development. And we saw an indication of that in his New Year's speech. We saw a much more robust version of that in his statement to the plenary of the party. And we know he knows that he cannot deliver that different path to a better economy under the sanctions regime. And which is why it is important that the sanctions remain in place until we are assured of complete denuclearization.
Clear answers. So let's open up, and I will take hands as I see them go. So gentleman here, lady there, and I'll come here. Yeah. So gentleman there in the corner. Just keep your hand up, please, sir, because always, yeah, there we go. Thank you. Introduce yourself, if you don't mind. Not just member of Chatham House, that's fine. We're kind of, but a little more would be useful.
Well, thank you, Minister Kam, for your hope and your words. Perhaps building up on the last question of Dr. Niblet, my name is Fabian Giraldo from Colombia. I'm serving the military. I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the genuine cause of Mr. Kim Jong-un for looking peace now and not before, and how solid you see his views and his narrative in order to achieve a durable peace, and perhaps what are the caveats here? Thank you.
So maybe, why don't we take this question first, and I'll group them later if we run short of time, but what caveats do you think exactly are in place as well on the North Korean side?
Caveats for North Korea or for ourselves?
Well, I heard maybe both sides. Why don't you do both? I heard on North Korea, but yeah.
Well, I think the whole rationale behind North Korea's missiles, nuclear weapons, other WMD program is that the world outside is hostile. The South Korea and in particular the US, our military, is a hostile force that is constantly trying to collapse it or undermine it. But what the Sentosa statement has done is remove that rationale. I think the importance of that very simple agreement, and not just at the working level or at senior level, but at the top, highest level between the President of the United States and the top leader of North Korea, to overcome the decades of hostilities and work towards a new relationship, has changed the political context in which we are having now this discussion on denuclearization. So what North Korea seeks is security guarantees, because the rationale behind the nuclear program was that this provides them security against the hostile world. And when the President of the United States has pledged, you will get your security guarantees if you denuclearize. I think that's a sign of courage on both sides to commit to that and then to have follow-up discussions for actions. So the negotiations going forward will be about North Korea's concrete action on denuclearization and American security guarantees for North Korea. And every step of the way, obviously, South Korea and the United States are close allies when it comes to security issues. So these discussions will be taking place constantly. I go to New York tomorrow to meet with Mr. Pompeo again, and we are briefing the Security Council on the latest developments together, not informal meetings, but over breakfast.
And if it takes a long time, you just laid out the list there of potential steps that would need to be taken in terms of security guarantees. Isn't there a risk of a disconnect between the speed at which Kim Jong-un needs those economic rewards to start taking shape, because obviously his country's in quite a bit of trouble, and economically, and the speed at which the negotiations can take place on something, as you said, that needs to be as verifiable and complete as one expects. Are you worried about a sort of time mismatch here?
Well, I think, you always get the question, so how long, when? But I think what is clear is that there is the political will that was not there in any previous negotiations at the from the top level to move in that direction. Obviously, you can't get the presidents and the leader engaging directly in these negotiations, but the negotiators work based upon that political will. Yeah. So I don't want to prejudge how long, but I think the commitment of the two leaders will ensure that the negotiations proceed more expeditiously than in any previous rounds.
Great. Lady there, please, with the white shirt first. Yeah.
My name is Federica Piazza. I work in emerging risk at Santander. Let's say that North Korea has been really genuine with the denuclearization commitment. It doesn't erase the fact that a generation of people have been brought up with self-defense as a religion and extreme anti-American propaganda. Do you see any risk of actually Kim Jong-un losing legitimacy between his people, or maybe including his own military apparatus?
Interesting.
Good question, but I think it's rather risky for me to comment on the future well-being of a very important partner that we are negotiating with. So I will not directly comment on that. But as I said in my speech, we are about co-prosperity and coexistence. And we are willing to work with North Korea towards a more normal engagement with the outside world, and most importantly in the economic sector. And I think that we are off to a very good start, both South-North and U.S.-North Korea. We'll see. We'll see how things develop. But I think given the pace of developments this past month, there's an expectation that this has created that things are going to move very fast. I think we need to pace ourselves a bit because it will take time.
Mm-hmm. Right. Here, please, first. No, just in front of you, actually. No, not you, sir. It's not you. Later. First, John. Yeah. Sorry. Just taking the order in which I saw them.
Sorry. Jonathan Paris, member of the Institute. Mrs. Minister, I'd like to talk to you about the commitment of the United States to retain its troops in South Korea. Is that something that might at some point be up for negotiation? And if so, how do you prevent, down the line, an inevitable reunification on their terms, which turns the peninsula almost into like a dagger pointing right at Japan?
Well,
key question.
Key question. The U.S. ROK alliance, in fact, the strength of the alliance and the defense posture has been, I think, an important part of North Korea's changed calculations, and it will remain so. The troop presence on the Korean Peninsula is not something on the table for discussion with North Korea. It is an alliance issue, and it will be dealt with at the alliance level first and foremost. What we seek is not unification. As I said, it's peaceful coexistence. And after a period of peaceful coexistence, you create the dynamics and the desire towards unification. I think it's ludicrous to think that given the capacity of South Korea currently and North Korea, that unification would somehow end up on their terms. So let me just end my comment there.
We're all discovering sovereignty has lots of different meanings and feelings to it these days. So first was the gentleman here, and then there, and then there. Yeah. Yeah. Microphone at the front here. Sorry. Yeah. The gentleman in the blue shirt.
Minister Kang, thank you for your comments today. Phil Phillips, member of the Institute and sometime resident of Korea. May I address your comments about your relationship with the UK post-Brexit? There are two views here in the UK that if we follow the Chequers white paper and have a close alignment on our trade arrangements with the EU, that other countries won't be able to sign a trade deal with us. what are your views on that? Will we be able to sign a trade deal with Korea? And do you have a preference for which way we go in our negotiations with the EU?
And you expect me to answer that
directly? You've had the easy questions on Korea, North Korea. Now you can get the difficult ones on Brexit.
No. Well, I think,
welcome to our world.
As I said, Korea EU trade and economic ties has benefited greatly from the Korea-EU FTA. And obviously, the UK was part of that whole. Now it's becoming separate from that whole. And my discussion with Jeremy Hunt yesterday was, ensuring that the ties that we've had with UK under that broader agreement is not undermined or damaged as we make the transition to a Korea-UK FTA. And I think the discussions are robust enough so that we prepare for all contingencies.
You got to ask the question. That's as much of an answer as you're going to get, I think, right now. Gentleman at the back first. Yeah, no, sitting down, I'm afraid. Sitting down. Well, I'm afraid. I'll get you later. Yeah.
I'm Dominic Boker-Ingram from Fiera Capital. We're an emerging market asset management company. Quick question on nuclear deals. The last time the US did a nuclear deal, it took about 2 years before they unilaterally reneged on it. And I'm talking about Iran, obviously. Whatever you think of the pros and cons of the deal or what kind of a deal it was, how much does that complicate or hinder what might happen regarding North Korea?
Well, I think the influence of that on North Korea's calculations is not all that clear at this point. It certainly has not come up in the discussions with them so far. At one level, you can argue that it is a clear demonstration of the American will to have a complete deal and not a halfway deal, as the American says is the reason that they withdrew from the JCPOA. Our immediate concern is the effect this might have on our businesses, as I think everybody is with Iran post-deal. And we have close consultations. I think we learn from others. Obviously, we very much hope that some kind of a deal can be made between all parties with the U.S. to move things forward with Iran. But in the meanwhile, we want to take care of our ties, business ties in particular. We import a great deal of crude oil from Iran. So it is a huge challenge for us.
And I suppose one of the advantages, you talked about a complete deal and that the JCPOA did not necessarily represent that because it was very much tied on nuclear. I suppose one of the advantages you have is that North Korea is not involved regionally the way that Iran has been is. But the proliferation side has been a big worry, is it not, about North Korea, that as a nuclear capable state, its risk has been one of proliferation. Is that I presume that's a central part of the negotiation as well, yes? Thinking about, in the context of the North Korea nuclear negotiation and denuclearization, you're going to require some very important safeguards, aren't you, in this?
Absolutely, absolutely. By denuclearization, we go back to the joint statement on denuclearization of 1992. And that is not producing, not using, not proliferating the whole range. Yeah.
So verifying that is going to be fun. Right, in the order. Gentleman there, then here, yeah, and then there, yeah.
Thank you very much, Minister. Ewan Grant, Institute of Statecraft. My question follows on from your warning that Rome wasn't built in a day. We don't necessarily going to see a rapid change very quickly. Are there any specific indicators, accepting we are in very early days, of particular grounds for optimism or indeed for concern? And very, very quickly, because diplomacy is sometimes private and public, Russia. was Russia's public stance in the inquiry to the torpedoing of your corvette, was that actually the private opinion of the Russians? Because, of course, the Russians, as per usual, came out and said it's not proven who was responsible. But I wonder if their private body language was different. Thank you.
Well, I wasn't there in this position when this had happened, but the position of government after a very thorough joint government expert investigation is very clear that this was due to a North Korean torpedo explosion that led to the sinking of the boat. I think that's what you're referring to. I recall that the Russians had a different view on this, but our position is very clear, and we have the evidence for that. Specific concern as we move forward.
What have you seen North Korea? What steps have you seen so far that are indicators by the North Korean government in particular that they are moving? I mean, is it simply we're going to have talks about talks, or have you seen any actual steps? Obviously, we've seen the dismantling of the test site and so on. I mean, anything you'd say that points specifically towards that?
Well, I think we, of course, watch very carefully their internal developments. And when the nuclear missiles program was a stated aim of the country for many, many years, and from that to suddenly swift to denuclearization is going to require domestic management of the messages. And we see clearly the shift about denuclearization and about the United States. The state media is very now clear of any hostile rhetoric vis-a-vis the United States. And I think that's an indication of preparations for the negotiations to proceed.
And there were some reports just in the press here publicly that there have been indications from satellite imagery and so on that the North Korean government is expanding the construction at one of its missile sites. There had been that step of what some people consider is a collapsing nuclear test site, which has been, as I understand it, being dismantled. Some people think, well, they would do that because then no one can get in and find out how far they'd advanced their program beforehand, which will then make verification more difficult later. But are you seeing mixed signals, I suppose, is where I would go on this? On the one hand, there's sort of positive steps, we're getting rid of our nuclear test site. On the other hand, you still have construction going on missile production sites. Do we worry or not worry?
What they have committed is to stop the testing.
Okay.
And to show a concrete step in that direction, they have closed down the nuclear test site. We very much wanted international experts to be there to observe and to confirm. That hasn't happened. We will press them for at some point to verify that this is indeed a genuine closure.
Right.
They had committed to stopping the testing and not stopping the programs themselves. Obviously, this is a big concern. We watch very carefully. We share the information and the intelligence and do the analysis with whomever has information on this, the United States and others. And this will all be part of our talks for denuclearization, the known facilities as well as those facilities that will emerge potentially and be confirmed.
Thank you. Right, I've got at least 3 more questions here. We're good on time. We need to finish bang on 9 o'clock, so we have about 7 more minutes. Gentlemen here first.
Sam Nassif, member of the Institute and freelance journalist. Just like to ask you the effect of all this new detente situation on the relation of North Korea with some countries that are central to the Middle East peace process, like Syria and Iran and others, and whether there will be any commitment from North Korea of a change or whether things will be left to them and to their allies in that respect. You know, that's my.
And let me just take one other question. I've got sort of 4 questions left, so I'll group 2 and 2, if that's all right, Foreign Minister. Yeah.
Hi, Dominic Dudley, freelance journalist. I just want to press you a little bit more on your plans in terms of US sanctions on Iran. It sounds like you're not planning to fall into line with the new waves of US sanctions. So is South Korea still planning to buy Iranian oil, and what steps will you take to protect and even encourage South Korean and Iranian trade and investment in the future?
So Middle Easty questions, yeah.
Yes, well, I think the US sanctions on Iran have ways for waivers and exemptions, and we had gotten that in the previous round of sanctions before the agreement, and we are seeking similar ways to minimize the impact on our industries. I'm not sure I clearly understand the first question about North Korea's ties with Syria, Iran.
Yeah, and it was,
forward.
are we like to see pledges in the agreement that will, in a way, prevent proliferation? I think some of the suspicion is that the Syrian plant, that I presume the one with when the Israelis blew up, may have had a little bit of North Korean help in its construction.
Well, I mean, I can't be. That would be having a crystal ball in front of my to specifically see the concrete terms of the agreement going forward. But as I said, this would also cover any proliferation concerns.
Great, gentleman here in the corner. Yeah, you say you had your hand up before. You still want a question? Or what? No, there was a gentleman there. Definitely had his hand up. Somebody there? No. You're covered, okay. Sorry, did you want to ask a question or not? Yeah. And then I've got a lady here and this one here as well, please. Oh, there. Yeah.
Karin Streuker from Reuters. I was just wondering, you touched on the UNGA assembly in September. Are you making any detailed plans of any leaders or other representatives between North Korea, South Korea, United States, either meeting on a bilateral or trilateral basis? Thank you.
I wouldn't rule that out, but there's no concrete plans at this point.
There you go. Right, please, yeah, here.
Susan Schoenfeld, Harrington. I'm a businesswoman here and involved in American politics from here. Question for you. First of all, were the South Koreans expecting President Trump to give up joint exercises between the Korean and the U.S., South Korean and U.S. military? Was that a surprise? And given what's happened over the last couple of days, how do you feel about prepping, working together with the U.S. and the President moving forward? How are South Koreans looking at the negotiating process based on what we've seen over the last week or two?
The decision is a joint decision to suspend the exercises in August to further strengthen the momentum for dialogue as a goodwill gesture, and this expecting very much North Korea to move on the denuclearization track. These exercises are it's not frozen in stone. They are discussed, planned for, the focus has changed, the scope changes, depending upon where the two militaries, the ROK and the US, would like to focus. And the decision, as I say, is a suspension of the August exercises, no decisions on further exercises going forward. I have to say the level of consultations between the United States and ROK has been extremely, extremely tight at all levels. The two presidents have met frequently, or often on phone. I have enjoyed close relations with the previous Secretary of State and also with the new one. So I think, in fact, the challenge, ironically, has meant that the alliance and the level of consultations has grown even tighter and closer in the recent years. And I think it will remain so.
We've got time. Sorry, I've got lots of hands going up, which I can't. We've got literally 2 minutes, so let me just take 2 last questions here in the front, and I will I will forego what I was going to say. Yeah.
Susan Donnell Griffiths, about the South China Sea. What is your opinion? How is South Korea going to handle the challenge that China is throwing down to the world, that the South China Sea is their sea, and it's a main trading route in the world?
Okay, South China Sea. And Roger, question next to you.
Roger Wolf. I'm from, my family is from East Germany, so it's another country which was divided, and of course I'm looking very great interest to the developments in South Korea. There is one news which came out recently that the Russians met the North Korean counterparts and negotiated the building of a bridge over the Tumen. What role do the Russians play in the background?
There you go. Always the last questions, the easy ones.
Okay. Well, I think on the China Sea, we are a trading nation, and the freedom of navigation and flight in this very vital sea lane is extremely important to us. And we very much hope that the commitments to keep it open, free, and we have a very principled position on this, and this is a position we make at every opportunity. I'm not quite sure what specific project that you are referring to, but the Council resolution makes a specific exemption for a particular project between Russia and North Korea. It's called the Najin-Hassan Railroad connection. And I'm not sure if this is connected to that, but there is an exemption for this in the Council resolutions. But the reality is not much has happened to use this connection because it's just not profitable. We have, South Korea has a unilateral sanctions that prevents any ship that had docked in North Korea to dock in our port for a certain period of time. So add it all together, there's not been much activity. Obviously, we would like to see a day when our economic ties with Russia connects with North Korea, and the trilateral economic cooperation proceeds in full force. But again, this requires the conditions being ripe, and those conditions mean the sanctions are lifted.
And just to close, just one word on Japan. The vital, the two treaty allies for the United States in the region. We haven't really mentioned Japan. They felt, I think, one would believe, a little bit sidelined in this process. What can the South Korean government do to make sure that America's two key allies are not, in a way, split by this process? Well, how important is this for your role at the moment?
Well, I think we have, I am in frequent discussions with Taro Kono, my Japanese counterpart. There's frequent trilateral meetings between the three foreign ministers. My president has also met with the prime minister and on the phone. So the level of communication, I think, assures us that we move in the same direction. And the messaging may be different on a daily basis, but I think the commitment to the ultimate goal is something that we all very clearly share.
At a time of extremely sensitive negotiations that are taking place at a moment of historic opportunity, clearly, it is also clear that South Korea is very fortunate to have you as their foreign minister, because, Mr. Kang, you've handled these questions extremely adroitly. I think we can see the scale, the ramifications from this bilateral, it's not a bilateral negotiation, but a peninsular challenge. Yes. Has really international tentacles connecting itself to the trade, to geostrategic relationships, to military balances of power, to examples of Iran, to America's leadership role or not at the moment. You really are in the eye of a particularly fascinating storm. I think you can see from the turnout this morning and the level of questions you got from Chatham House members, the great interest in the future and the great hope for you to be successful as well in all that you're doing. So we thank you very much for taking the time to share so many thoughts with us, and hope to welcome you back for an update again in the future. Thank you very much. Strong hand, please.